This is the facial reconstruction created from a severed human head found in an Illinois park in 1993, the only clue investigators had for nearly 3 decades. The victim remained unidentified until 2022, when DNA genealogy revealed she was Susan Lund, who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1992 after walking to a nearby store. Despite finally learning her name almost 30 years later, the rest of her body was never recovered. No suspect was ever charged, and her murder remains unsolved. This is a decorative tower filled with thousands of shaved human jawbone fragments, removed from patients during cosmetic jaw reduction surgeries in South Korea. The display came from a Seoul plastic surgery clinic, where the surgeon stacked discarded pieces of patients' faces into stacked columns to represent how many operations he had performed. The towers sparked public backlash and were later removed after authorities fined the clinic for violating medical waste laws requiring human remains to be incinerated. The case became a disturbing symbol of how normalized extreme facial alteration has become in South Korea, to the point that many patients have even reported being questioned at border control because their faces no longer match their passport photos. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. Brendan Fraser's brief collapse was driven by years of physical destruction, psychological breakdown, and what many believe was a Hollywood blacklist. At the height of his career, he was performing nearly all of his own stunts, which led to multiple herniated discs, spinal compression, a fractured pelvis, and repeated surgeries that left him in constant pain. In 1999, Fraser nearly died during the filming of The Mummy, when a hanging stunt went horribly wrong and the rope was pulled too tightly, cutting off blood flow to his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. He later said doctors told him he came dangerously close to serious brain injury or death. Around the same time, he endured the passing of his mother, a financially devastating divorce, and severe depression. Brendan later alleged he was sexually assaulted by a powerful Hollywood executive in 2003, and after speaking about it privately, his career abruptly stalled. Many believe he was quietly blacklisted, as major roles vanished almost overnight, leaving him to describe himself as invisible for years while living in pain and isolation. After roughly a 15-year hiatus, Fraser ultimately rebuilt his life and career, returning to Hollywood on his own terms and finding renewed stability and appreciation from fans. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence. This was the moment skydiving student Christopher Jones suddenly went unconscious during what was supposed to be a routine training skydive in 2014. At around 9,000 feet, his body stiffened and began violently seizing in freefall, his head snapping back as he lost all control, tumbling through the air with no ability to deploy his parachute. Realizing what was happening, instructor Sheldon McFarland chased him down mid-air, fighting the wind and closing the distance with mere seconds to spare. McFarland eventually managed to grab Jones, stabilize his limp body, and pull his ripcord just in time, preventing a horrific fall that would have instantly been fatal. If you're a bad person who's afraid of heights, here's a sneak peek of what hell looks like. During a sudden storm at Six Flags Mexico in August of 2024, riders on the Skyscreamer swing ride found themselves trapped nearly 250 feet in the air as heavy rain and strong winds moved in. Instead of descending, the ride's automatic safety systems activated and locked the chairs in place, leaving passengers suspended high above the park with their legs dangling as powerful storms intensified around them. For roughly 10 minutes, riders were forced to remain exposed to the storm with no control over the situation, unsure of what would happen next or if the ride would be struck by lightning. Eventually, the ride was safely lowered once conditions stabilized and no physical injuries were reported. This was the moment Icelandic singer Björk crashed out at Bangkok Airport in 1996, lunging at reporter Julie Kaufman and knocking her to the ground, moments after the reporter simply greeted her with the words, "Welcome to Bangkok." What appeared to be an explosive reaction to a harmless greeting was later explained by Björk as a breaking point. She claimed Kaufman had stalked her and her 9-year-old son for days across multiple locations, ignoring requests to stop. Björk said the airport encounter triggered fear for her child's safety. Kaufman denied any stalking, no charges were filed, and the footage became one of the most infamous celebrity confrontations of the 90s. On April 16, 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol capsized and sank off the coast of Jindo while carrying 476 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. An abrupt turn combined with overloaded cargo caused the ship to list and rapidly flood. Passengers were repeatedly told over the intercom to stay where they were. Instructions most of them followed as water quickly filled the decks. The captain and several crew members abandoned ship early, leaving hundreds trapped inside. The ferry sunk in roughly 2 hours, killing 304 people, the majority of them teenagers. The captain was convicted of gross negligence and murder by omission and sentenced to life in prison, while multiple crew members and shipping company officials received prison terms. This was the moment an Indonesian conservationist broke down in tears after finally witnessing one of the rarest flowers on Earth bloom. After searching the rainforests of Sumatra for 13 years, Diki Andriki and his team found a Rafflesia, a parasitic flower often nicknamed a corpse flower because it releases a powerful odor of rotting flesh to attract insects. The plant spends most of its life hidden inside a host vine and only blooms for a few days, making sightings incredibly rare as researchers never even see one in their lifetime. When the massive, foul-smelling flower began to open in front of him, the weight of more than a decade of dangerous jungle expeditions and failed searches finally hit. This is one of the rarest atmospheric events ever caught on video. Upward lightning erupting from the summit of Volcán de Agua in Guatemala. The bolts appear to tear straight out of the volcano, making it look less like weather and more like something unnatural unfolding in real time. Unlike normal lightning that strikes downward from clouds, this phenomenon shoots upward from the ground into the storm above, triggered by intense electrical imbalance. It's so uncommon that storm chasers never even see it once in their lifetime, and it's almost never captured this clearly over a populated city. This footage shows former Nazi concentration camp guard Joseph Schutz covering his face as he arrived at a German courtroom in 2022. At 101 years old, Schutz became the oldest person ever tried and convicted for Holocaust-era crimes. Prosecutors argued that while serving as an SS guard at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp between 1942 and 1945, he knowingly assisted in the systematic murder of at least 3,500 prisoners. Schutz claimed he did absolutely nothing wrong and was not aware of the gruesome crimes being carried out at the camp. He was convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he remained free while appealing the verdict. Schutz died in April of 2023 before serving his sentence. Angie Barlow, a British woman with a severe fear of dentists, avoided professional dental care for roughly a decade by repeatedly supergluing loose or fallen teeth back into her mouth. Instead of fixing the underlying decay and gum disease, the glue trapped bacteria beneath the teeth and caused progressive infections. Over time, the damage became catastrophic, with dentists later finding that up to 90% of the bones supporting her upper teeth had been destroyed. By the time she finally sought treatment, 11 teeth had to be removed, much of her jawbone had deteriorated, and she required extensive reconstructive surgery and dental implants to restore basic oral function. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. Here's a terrifying clip of a Ukrainian soldier showing symptoms of rabies. Throughout the video, he tries to drink water but physically can't. This reaction is called hydrophobia, one of the clearest signs that rabies has reached the brain. Rabies is one of the deadliest diseases known. If treated immediately after exposure before symptoms appear, it's almost always preventable. But once symptoms like difficulty swallowing, confusion, or agitation begin, the virus has already caused significant neurological damage. At this stage, survival is so rare that statistically, a person has a better chance of surviving a gunshot wound to the head than surviving symptomatic rabies. There's no proven cure, and death is usually inevitable once symptoms appear. Chef Anthony Bourdain often described his life as something he wasn't supposed to still have. In the 1980s, while working as a chef in New York City, he fell into a severe heroin addiction, using daily, stealing from coworkers, and living in a constant state of physical and mental collapse. He later admitted he fully expected to die young during that period and was surprised he survived it at all. When fame arrived years later after writing Kitchen Confidential, Bourdain said that sudden success in many ways was more dangerous than addiction, giving him money, access, and non-stop travel that nearly pulled him back into self-destructive behavior. While filming No Reservations and Parts Unknown, he spent years moving through regions marked by executions, cartel violence, and war, repeatedly confronting death up close until he said it began to feel disturbingly ordinary. Even as his career thrived, Bourdain acknowledged that depression never truly left him, describing it as something that doesn't disappear but waits in the shadows, a statement that would take on a far darker meaning after he took his own life in 2018. This was the moment a normal day at a busy restaurant nearly turned into a child abduction. Without warning, a man later identified as Nassim Slimane vaulted over a railing and grabbed a young girl by the neck as she sat with her family, attempting to pull her away in front of stunned onlookers. But before he could escape, restaurant owner Dishal Suku, a trained jiu-jitsu black belt, rushed in, tackled the suspect to the ground, and restrained him until police arrived. Slimane was arrested and later prosecuted for the attempted kidnapping, while the family was left shaken by how close the child came to vanishing within seconds. This is exactly why you should always test the waters before swimming in the streets of Thailand after a massive flood. Severe flooding hit Thailand in November of 2025 after days of heavy rain, with water rising more than 20 feet in some areas and swallowing entire neighborhoods within hours. The floods came so fast that many residents were trapped without food for days, and more than 100 people were reported killed across the region. As water displaced wildlife and habitats, massive snakes, including pythons, were seen swimming through streets and entering homes seeking higher ground alongside terrified residents. Rigor mortis stiffens the muscles after death, but once it wears off, limbs can twitch or shift due to muscle relaxation or gas buildup. These movements can be so startling that morticians have reported bodies appearing to sit up, raise their arms, or even turn their heads. In 1957, 22-year-old rock star Jerry Lee Lewis married his teenage first cousin Myra Gale Brown in Mississippi. At the time, Lewis had still been married to another woman, while Myra Gale was only 13 years old and still believed in Santa Claus. After riding a big wave of success with hits like Great Balls of Fire, the scandalous marriage effectively destroyed Lewis's career. In January of 2024, 29-year-old Nolan Arbaugh became the first human to receive a Neuralink brain implant after being paralyzed in a diving accident. Though the surgery was celebrated as a milestone, things quickly unraveled. 85% of the device's threads retracted from his brain, crippling its function. Neuralink scrambled to deploy emergency software fixes just to keep it working, allowing Nolan to play chess and move a cursor with his thoughts. The surgery carried serious risks, including infection, brain damage, and long-term complications. Arbaugh's implant was never removed, and the company hasn't disclosed the full extent of its ongoing effects. In 2017, retired U.S. Army Colonel David Will Riggins was awarded $8.4 million in a defamation lawsuit after a woman publicly accused him of raping her decades earlier when they were cadets at West Point. Just as Riggins was being considered for promotion as Brigadier General, the accusation was posted on a blog, effectively derailing his military career. But an investigation soon found no supporting evidence, and a Virginia jury later determined the woman's claims were provably false. Although the final payout was reduced to around $2.3 million, Riggins said he was grateful to have his name cleared, even if the damage to his career couldn't be undone. Morbid Facts, Part 632. Known for his roles in Weird Science, Titanic, and Twister, in 2017, actor Bill Paxton underwent heart surgery to repair an aortic aneurysm and replace a valve, a procedure that his family later claimed was high-risk, unconventional, and perhaps not even necessary. The surgeon, Dr. Ali Koinazad, had allegedly been warned by the hospital for his poor judgment in past cases, but he still performed the operation. According to the lawsuit, Paxton was never properly informed of the risks involved or the surgeon's history. In the days following the procedure, Paxton initially appeared to be recovering well and even spoke with his family. But without proper monitoring, and with the surgeon having left the hospital, complications soon arose, including internal bleeding, cardiac instability, and worsening organ function. Despite his declining condition, no adequate care was administered in time. Paxton ultimately suffered a massive stroke and died shortly afterwards, in what his family described as a preventable cascade of medical negligence. Pamela Anderson contracted hepatitis C in the 90s after sharing a tattoo needle with her husband Tommy Lee, who never told her he had the deadly virus. Doctors warned her it could kill her within 10 years, and the virus slowly attacked her liver while she suffered from chronic fatigue, weakness, and bouts of depression. At her lowest, she described feeling like her body was rotting from the inside as the disease forced her out of the spotlight and into isolation. For over a decade, she lived with the fear of cancer or liver failure, until she was finally cured in 2015 by a breakthrough antiviral treatment. In 2004, 7-year-old Tyler Moon became a walking miracle after a horrific quad crash left both he and his father critically injured in the Australian bush. Despite suffering 2 collapsed lungs filling with blood, 7 broken ribs, and a shattered arm, the boy staggered for nearly a kilometer through dense forest to reach help. When he finally reached his mother's house, he managed to say, "Dad said you should call an ambulance," before collapsing on the ground. Doctors said it was a miracle that Tyler survived at all, let alone saved someone else's life in the process. Creator of Naruto, Masashi Kishimoto, endured a grueling work schedule that pushed him to the brink of physical and emotional collapse. He routinely worked up to 20 hours per day, leading to several hospitalizations, and even missing the birth of his own child due to crushing deadlines. By the final arcs of Naruto, he admitted to feeling emotionally numb, simply trying to survive the demands of the series. Writing certain death scenes took a drastic personal toll on him, and he received constant death threats from fans over controversial plot decisions. Much of his work was inspired by feelings of deep isolation and insecurity, stemming from his youth and the constant comparisons to his twin brother. These personal struggles bled into Naruto's themes of loneliness, rejection, and the desperate need for acknowledgement. In 1992, Pepsi launched a promotion in the Philippines called Number Fever, offering 1 million pesos to anyone with the winning bottle cap number, a life-changing prize for most people in the country at the time. On May 25th, the winning number announced was 349, but due to a printing error, over 600,000 caps with that number had been distributed. Thousands of people thought they had won, only to be told their prizes wouldn't be honored, and chaos quickly ensued. Riots broke out, Pepsi trucks were bombed, and at least 5 people were killed, including a mother and her child, when a grenade was thrown at a delivery truck. Pepsi offered small consolation payments, but the damage was done. The scandal became one of the most infamous marketing disasters in history, and Pepsi never fully regained public trust in the Philippines. Conan O'Brien's world was rocked in 2024 when both of his parents, married for 66 years, died just 3 days apart. His father passed at 95, followed shortly by his mother at 92, leaving Conan to plan 2 funerals back-to-back before rushing overseas to continue filming Conan O'Brien Must Go. Still reeling from the loss, he was then forced to evacuate Los Angeles due to the raging wildfires. Conan later admitted he spent that entire period in a fugue state, emotionally numb and running on autopilot even as he hosted the Oscars. Tasmanian tiger was hunted to extinction after being falsely blamed for killing sheep, despite having jaws far too weak to take down large prey. The last known thylacine Benjamin froze to death while in captivity in 1936, just 2 months after the species finally gained legal protection. Croatian nurse Hedviga Golic died alone in her apartment in 1966 and was left undiscovered for 42 years. Her mummified remains were finally found in 2008 during renovations, after decades of neighbors assuming she'd simply moved away. Her electricity bills were quietly paid by the building's architect until shortly before her body was found. Beloved by millions, Latina singer Selena was on the verge of global superstardom when cracks began to show behind the scenes of her fame. One of her most devoted fans, Yolanda Saldivar, had pushed her way into Selena's inner circle, first as president of her fan club, then as manager of her boutiques. But what began as genuine admiration eventually spiraled into obsession and control. Yolanda grew possessive, isolating Selena from others, and was soon suspected of embezzling money. In March of 1995, Selena met her at a Corpus Christi motel to retrieve crucial financial documents. Backed into a corner and fearing exposure, Yolanda pulled out a revolver and shot Selena in the back as she tried to leave. Selena managed to run nearly 400 feet to the lobby, leaving a trail of blood behind her before collapsing. With her final breath, she named her killer as Yolanda Saldivar, the woman who was once her biggest fan. Morbid Facts, Part 655. In 2020, Tim Bleefnick appeared on Family Feud and joked that the biggest mistake he made at his wedding was saying "I do."
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding? Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
But 3 years later, in February of 2023, his estranged wife Rebecca Bleefnick was found shot 14 times in their home while their 3 young boys were upstairs. The couple had apparently been going through a bitter divorce, and Tim went to the extreme to deal with it. He was arrested, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When 36-year-old Heather McManamy was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she began writing dozens of greeting cards for her young daughter to open in the years after she was gone, covering birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, and even her wedding day. Each card was filled with love, jokes, and advice, allowing her daughter to still receive words of comfort and celebration long after Heather's death in 2015. It was her way of staying present for every milestone she knew she wouldn't live to see. A French woman was scammed out of 830,000 euros after falling for an elaborate scheme involving an AI-generated version of Brad Pitt. It began in 2023 when someone posing as Pitt's mother contacted her online, followed by Brad himself claiming he was battling kidney cancer and desperately needed financial help or else he was gonna die. He sent AI-generated hospital photos showing himself bruised and hooked up to machines. Over time, the woman was manipulated into believing they were in a secret relationship, one he swore had to be kept quiet because of restrictive Hollywood contracts. She even believed they were engaged and that he planned to move to France to marry her. She wired him thousands for fake medical bills and customs fees for luxury gifts that he sent her but never arrived. After her husband divorced her over the delusion, she sent the scammers 775,000 euros she received from the settlement. Despite repeated warnings, she insisted it was true love until she eventually realized she had thrown her entire life away for a fake person. Mexican painter Frida Kahlo's life was a haunting mix of brilliance and suffering. After contracting polio at age 6, classmates called her Frida the Cripple. At 18, she was nearly killed when a steel handrail impaled her during a bus crash, entering through her pelvis and exiting her abdomen. Her spine, pelvis, collarbone, and foot were completely shattered. She endured over 30 brutal surgeries, spent months in body casts, and painted while bedridden. Frida later suffered 5 to 7 miscarriages as a result, with one nearly killing her from blood loss. and she captured the horror in disturbing works like Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself naked, bleeding, and surrounded by a floating fetus and surgical tools. Later on, gangrene took her leg, only deepening her depression. She filled her diary with dark images and wrote, "I am not sick, I am broken." Though officially ruled a pulmonary embolism, many believe she intentionally overdosed at 47. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope to never return." In 2003, 28-year-old marine biologist Kirsty Brown became the first known human killed by a leopard seal while she was snorkeling near a research station in Antarctica. Without warning, the seal grabbed her by the head and dragged her beneath the icy water, diving down for several minutes and resurfacing with her body before diving down again several times, eventually pulling her as deep as 230 feet. Her colleagues watched helplessly as the powerful predator treated her like prey, mimicking the way it would typically toy with penguins before drowning them. After holding her underwater for 6 minutes, the seal finally released Kirsty, but despite desperate CPR attempts, she never regained consciousness. In 2012, NYPD officer Gilberto Valle was arrested after his wife discovered he'd been posting on fetish forums about kidnapping, torturing, and eating women, including her. He had detailed abduction plans, photos of real women he said he was targeting, and even searched online for recipes for cooking human meat. The FBI found his chats on a site called Dark Fetish Net, where he discussed taking advantage of his police access to stalk victims. Though convicted in 2013 for conspiracy to kidnap, his conviction was later overturned when a judge ruled the evidence was insufficient to prove intent, calling the chats fantasy roleplay. An appeals court upheld the acquittal, stating that while disturbing, his actions were protected under the First Amendment. Joey Jordison was the founding drummer of Slipknot and one of the most influential figures in modern metal, known for his blistering speed, chaotic precision, and aggressive stage presence. He was instrumental in writing much of the band's early music and helped define their sound during their rise to fame. But in 2013, fans were shocked when he was suddenly fired from the band without explanation. Years later, Jordison revealed he had been silently battling transverse myelitis, a rare neurological disorder that left him temporarily unable to walk or play drums. Despite recovering and launching new projects, he never returned to Slipknot. On July 26, 2021, Jordison died in his sleep at just 46 years old, and no official cause of death was ever made public. In July of 2025, 44-year-old Thawisak Namwangsa was found dead in his bedroom after reportedly surviving for nearly a month on nothing but beer. Over 100 empty bottles surrounded his body, forming a narrow path to his bed. He had refused food and water following a bitter divorce, and is believed to have suffered a fatal seizure before paramedics could reach him. Cop killer Donald Eugene Webb was on the FBI's most wanted list for more than 25 years, longer than anyone else at the time, and was never captured. It was later discovered that his wife had been hiding him inside a secret room in her home for nearly 2 decades, and buried him in her backyard after he died from a stroke. In August of 1993, 4-year-old Derek Roby had been walking alone to summer camp when 13-year-old Eric Smith lured him into the woods under the guise of showing him a new shortcut. Once they were out of sight, Smith strangled Derek until he was unconscious, brutally smashed his head with a large rock, then poured Kool-Aid into the boy's wounds. Before fleeing the scene, Smith removed one of Derek's shoes and scattered the contents of his lunchbox all around him, creating a disturbing and almost ritualistic display that baffled investigators. The child's body was found later that day, just yards from the park he never made it to. Smith later confessed and was tried as an adult despite his young age, receiving 9 years to life in prison. He was denied parole 10 times over the years, with Derek's family attending each hearing to oppose his release. After 27 years behind bars, Smith was finally granted parole in 2022, sparking debates about whether someone capable of such violence at 13 can ever truly be reformed. In 2019, 18-year-old Denali Bremer from Alaska was messaged by a wealthy tycoon named Tyler, who promised her $9 million if she murdered someone and sent him the proof. Convinced the offer was real, Bremer recruited several friends whom she told she would split the money with, and they chose to target 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman, a developmentally disabled girl who considered Bremer her best friend. The group lured Cynthia on a fake hiking trip to Thunderbird Falls, where they bound her with duct tape and led her to a remote spot. That's when one of the friends shot her in the back of the head while Bremer filmed the murder and sent the footage to Tyler, after which they dumped the body in the river. Authorities uncovered the plot through digital evidence, leading to multiple arrests. Tyler ended up being an unemployed catfisher named Darren Schillmiller who lived in his parents' basement in Indiana. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison, the same sentence handed to Bremer. Shockingly, just a year later in 1998, Owen Hart botched another. The back-to-back incidents helped solidify the piledriver's reputation as one of wrestling's most dangerous moves and led to stricter safety protocols in the WWE. While filming Jackass No. 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day.